Well, welcome. I'm going to be calling the Finance and Operations Committee to order. I'm sitting in for Treasurer Lillard, a humble, poor substitute for that. So what I'm counting on here among our other committee members and those of you there, we're going to make this a team effort to get through this agenda and to have a robust discussion about some very important issues. So I want to thank you for being here, and I want to ask Ms. Height if she will call the roll. For those joining virtual, and I believe there's one, just a reminder to please state whether there are others present in the room with you. Madam Secretary, if you'd call the roll.
Treasurer Lillard, Commissioner Brackett.
Here.
Commissioner Matlock.
Here.
Commissioner Rader. Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Stafford.
President participating virtually and alone.
Comptroller Mumpower. Chairman, you have 5 members present and a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Next is the adoption of the agenda. With no questions or objections, I'll entertain a motion and a second to adopt the agenda for today's meeting. Okay, with no objection, we'll take a roll call vote to Madam Secretary. If you would call the roll.
Commissioner Brackett.
Aye.
Commissioner Matlock. Commissioner Rader. Commissioner Smith.
Here, yes.
Commissioner Stafford.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 5 ayes.
Thank you. The next item is public comments. Dr. Gentile, have we received any requests for public comment to address the committee?
Mr. Chairman, we have no public comment today for this committee.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gentile. With no questions or objections, I'll entertain a motion and a second to adopt the minutes from the February 6, 2025 committee meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Sir, I have one to add to that is that at that committee meeting was Skylar Brackett. The minutes right now do not reflect her attendance there, but she was at that committee meeting.
Okay, we can
You can amend the
make that
minutes.
as a correction.
Mhm.
Okay, so with that, does the second still stand?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. With no further objection, Secretary, if you call the roll.
Commissioner Brackett.
Aye.
Commissioner Matlock. Commissioner Rader.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye,
Commissioner Stafford.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 5 ayes.
thank you. Dr. Gentile, will you give us the executive director's report for the committee?
I certainly will. Thank you very much for having me here today to go over this with you all today. The layout of my executive director report is, why are you laughing at me?
Well, where else would you be?
So many places. So many places. Antonina, who's one of our fellows this summer, she said to me this year, actually, she said to me as I walked in here, "Are you here for this committee too?" I was like, "Antonina, I'm here for every meeting." And that's going to be happening today. I want to thank Commissioner Stafford for being with us virtually today. Among his many duties, he's also on the board of his alma mater. I believe it's Roger Williams. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
And you were at their graduation and board meeting this week. Is that correct?
That is also correct.
All right. Well, we are really grateful that you're able to join us here today. I don't typically do an executive director report for a committee, but I'll echo some of the thoughts I shared for the first committee. But also, I was remiss that I didn't mention in that first committee. I got a more extensive gratitude tomorrow. But I want to thank Lipscomb University for hosting this meeting today. It is partially out of symbolism and also convenience that we have here our Veterans Reconnect Conference happening right now as we overlap. That's a program that we put on in partnership with the university, and we're grateful for them also hosting us for this committee meeting and commission meeting. The symbolism part comes in that, and I shared with you all this beforehand in the phone calls prior to this meeting. Starting July 1, THEC will be the board of directors for TSAC. For the first time in its existence, the boards are coming together into one. prior to today, prior before July 1, your purview extended to public universities, community colleges, TCATs, and nonprofits and for-profits that required our authorization as an institution to operate. THEC did not have direct relationship to a lot of our TCUA institutions, and now via financial aid, Lipscomb is directly impacted by decisions made by this board. We also had a bill passed this past session that brings some more responsibilities or opportunities for reform on how we act as a commission with staff as well. Pertaining to this committee here, we have the ability to set now multiple tuition ranges. A question that came up during the March commission meeting with regards to, do we have the ability to set multiple ranges up until this past session? The answer was no. And also capital projects removes the requirement for THEC to prioritize capital projects and move more into a vetting of capital projects and categorization. But I want to take a moment to say that we will be talking about both of those today. One, with a formal policy approval. The second, to spark a conversation so that we can understand where the commission would like to go on tuition binding authority. But I want to take a moment to thank Commissioner Rader. In our phone call, he said, so what is the proper role for THEC when it comes to tuition? What am I thinking as the executive director when it comes to what holds at the SHIA level, the agency level, and what the board of trustees at the institutions and the systems are charged with? And I know that although the comptroller cannot be here today, Robert Quitmeyer from the comptroller's office will share the comptroller's perspectives on that exact issue. But what I would say is that prior to now, with TSAC and THEC being separate entities from a governance issue, we had not talked about tuition as far as it goes towards safeguarding the investments of Tennessee. How far, we might be the #1 state in the country when it comes to financial aid, and we are. We give out the most financial aid per student in the country. How do tuition increases impact the extent that financial aid can cover? We haven't really talked about that as a board before. I think going forward, we really should, and bringing the two authorities together will allow for that. Thinking about affordability beyond the margins of an annual increase in tuition and more about the big picture of affordability, I believe that is where the commission and the staff should be thinking, should be going. So I welcome the conversation today, and I thank you all for being here today. Again, I am required to be here, but thank you anyways for letting me be here. And looking forward to the conversation. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Gentle. The first item on our regular calendar is the financial policy revision, and Paul Marshall, who is the Senior Director of Facilities Planning and Preparedness, will provide an overview of the policy revisions and answer any questions. Mr. Marshall, you are recognized.
So we on, you're on. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Director Gentile, members of the commission. I'm going to very briefly go through the policy change, and then we can have any discussion we'd like. This is on the policy revision. As it relates to the legislation this past spring, THEC modified, the legislation modifies THEC's responsibility with regard to capital outlay projects. Section 6 of Public Chapter 186 was crafted to support the state's interest in the development and identification of projects that best align with state goals for higher education. Capital outlay projects will be categorized according to project types and submitted to the state for consideration. And the state will then have the flexibility to recommend projects that best align with each year's appropriation goals. The project categories are workforce development needs and goals, institutional research needs and goals, institutional priorities for consideration due to time sensitivity or other extenuating circumstances, and finally, facility renovation or optimization needs. So this policy revision removes references to both priority rank and to both project priority and project rank. In addition, the project categories from statute will be memorialized in this policy. As a result of the legislation and this policy change, the rubric and scoring of projects are removed from the capital process. So THEC's capital outlay instructions for the institutions will continue to support development of capital projects that are consistent with state goals, with the institution's respective missions and master plans and detailed advanced planning, These could include such things as program, budget, schedule, suitable for the project's potential funding and subsequent state building commission approval. So that's the bite. So I'm happy to answer any questions or have any discussion if required.
Questions from the committee? Well, I have one. I happen to believe that you and your colleagues at THEC have provided an important role in ensuring the quality, and particularly in your particular case, Paul, the security and the safety of the construction of these buildings. And it has been a unique voice, independent from the other voices that speak to these issues. So how are you going to, or what is the plan for the articulation of the recommendations regarding the projects? Is it a narrative? I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to use what we've used in the past of rankings or scores. And I think it's fair to say that those weren't universally followed anyway, but still the importance of assuring that these state assets are built with quality and have some guarantee of endurance over a lifetime has been an important contribution by the THEC staff.
Sure. So I can weigh in. We're obviously at the outset of this new policy change. So with that said, I'll sort of give you my perspective on things, and I'll defer to Director Gentile if he's got anything to add to that. First and foremost, this gives us the ability to ensure that every project that goes forward and comes from the commission to go to the board and then to the state, we stand behind 100%. One of the things that, even though we're not doing ranking or prioritization via a rubric, we are still thoroughly vetting the projects. We're going through ensuring that they align with the campus's facility master plan, that when we get a submittal package together for a capital outlay or a capital maintenance project, that everything is included in that package that is required to be successful if going to the State Building Commission. Without us filling that role, not just the facility staff at THEC, but the totality of THEC's broad range of experience in academics and finance and everything else, including other partners that we bring in or may bring in. I think that the policy allows us to have a quorum to review these. Were it not for THEC doing that review of the project submittals, there really wouldn't be any stopgap between the time a campus submitted that project and it showed up at the SBC, or at least showed up to OSA for discussion to be ready to go to the SBC. So we're sort of playing a vital role in ensuring and supporting and facilitating for the campuses, supporting the campuses and their projects, that when they bring a submittal packet to us for capital outlay or capital maintenance, that it's ready to go, that they haven't inadvertently left out a critical piece of documentation, whether required by FNA or another part of the state legislature or state leadership.
Hey, you say that, and one of the questions I have is, in your past experience, have there been those kinds of errors and omissions that you've caught?
There have been submittals that have included documents that were either not complete or had errors. Yes, sir.
And that is one of the contributions you've made in collaboration with the institutions.
Is the ability to, on a year-by-year basis, to continue to assist them, to educate them on what constitutes a successful project, what a really successful capital outlay project looks like coming forward, and all of the necessary components being included, so that there's no impediments.
Right. And I'd be quick to point out that it's never been, at least in my experience, an adversarial relationship.
I certainly hope not.
Yeah. And all of that will continue.
It's my hope, and I think the others at THEC hope, that without the prioritization and ranking being part of the conversation, that we could potentially have the ability to play a even more collaborative role.
And I'll just echo that on a number of fronts. I mean, I've been now with THEC for 12 years under different ways that we've addressed policy, thinking back to when, I'll stop calling you out today, Dr. Deaton, but when Dr. Deaton ran the fiscal policy team at THEC, sitting down, this was before Focus, and merging a TBR and UT projects together. And there's a lot of thought and deliberation that went into it. And we are, I'd say, light years beyond that with as far as the materials we get from the institutions. And we've worked closely with FNA, the Office of Division of Finance Administration, to understand what they needed for vetting of those projects with regards to the technical aspects of it. Where we moved away from, and what I look forward to getting back to the good old days there, is that we got ourselves into a system where we were trying to, in an objective way, but it was very subjective, have multiple readers read through all the projects and determine what was ranked number 7 versus what was ranked number 8. We bring in Robert from the Comptroller's office to help with that, Ashley Neighbors, Chris Mustaine from our constitutional officers to help with that. But beyond that, there was no discussion at the commission staff level with the chief academic officer or the head of policy and finance to really say, are these programs making the mark? An example of this came up this past year, and Commissioner Stafford spoke to this, and we know University of Memphis was concerned. University of Memphis had a really good, solid program where it came to the facilities and what they were planning to do, and Paul and Patty sung the praises. However, its ability to meet research needs in our scoring system didn't really rise to the top. Under the new process, we have categories. This is in statute. This is not our development, but in statute where we are to categorize the capital projects and put that differently, think about capital projects on how they meet workforce development needs, how they meet institutional research needs, institutional for priorities that have nothing to do with either. Perhaps an airport is about to go through one of the facilities that happened at TCAP Memphis in the Memphis airport. There was not a scoring regime that could capture that well. And then a fourth category is facility renovation or optimization needs. I'm looking forward to where this can go, where we still have the architects doing their reviews and making sure that the building is going to be a great building, and then having THEC staff being able to come together and talk through, and this is how it's going to advance the needs of the state, of the institutions. And if it turns out a project is lacking, we can have open dialogue with institutions so they can improve the projects for the future.
Dr. Smith, I've got a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is not specifically to the revision to the policy, but it does pertain to capital projects. And so historically, we have created facilities on campuses, and over time, those facilities do need maintenance. And also what happens over time is that there becomes a continuous deferral of maintenance because of the lack of funding on the campus. And as we look at projects in the future and building facilities that are technologically advanced and capable of doing the things that we need, we do know that maintenance is still required and will be required going forward. How do we think about the maintenance cost for new facilities? Is that something that can be captured as part of the capital expenditure, or do we fully expect the university to be able to fund all of the capital expenditure, or I'm sorry, all of the maintenance expenditures on an ongoing basis? And when they don't, what happens as we go forward and those facilities start to deteriorate, and then the cost to maintain doesn't keep up? I've spoken with one LGI president who has this concern, and some of you have probably heard from this person as well. But I'm just wondering what we can do to try to make sure that the capital projects we approve in the future don't become monoliths of empty facilities as we go forward as well.
Happy to weigh in. So great question. And I'll split it into two or maybe three parts and try and be brief. First and foremost, I'm excited about the policy change because as Director Gentile just said, we now may have the opportunity to be more collaborative with the institutions prior to receiving their documents or at least on an ongoing basis. And I say that because the ability to have an open dialogue about a particular outlay project would give us the opportunity to talk about that very thing, about how the design of the facility can have a lower impact on long-term maintenance. And that just comes from years of experience of having worked on a campus and been responsible for building buildings that each one of us at THEC in the facilities department has that knowledge. And so we could share that sort of, years, decades of experience of how a choice of this versus that will impact long-term maintenance. So that's on a new building, new capital outlay. Talking about renovations to a capital outlay project or ongoing capital maintenance, I would say that THEC could continue to play the role that we have of encouraging campuses to prioritize and look at their most critical capital maintenance needs and submit them to us for us to translate on to leadership on an annual basis. We can continue to provide a well-considered professional review of the reasonable cost of that and certainly support the campuses in that way. I guess the only place where I would not see us playing a role is the decision at leadership of whether to or not to fund capital maintenance at all beyond the 50 million recurring if that continues.
Understood. That's helpful. That I think it probably is a good topic for us to have further conversation on to really to ensure that the state's monies for capital projects don't go to waste for projects that can't be sustained over the life of the project.
The Office of the State Architect has a lot of guidance in how certain things are maintained, whether it be in roof warranty requirements or other things like that. So there are some guardrails in place to direct institutions on how they construct and design and build facilities to create a long-term sustainable and durable project. But certainly there are other conversations that can be had, and we would, enjoy the opportunity to participate there.
Thank you, Paul. Chairman, thank you for the indulgence.
Sure. Yes, Madam Chair?
As I'm listening to you talk, it sounds almost like we're in a parent-child relationship where we have everyone's getting a little bit of funds to pass out. Outside of that, are there any barriers that we have put in place, at the state level, whether it's THEC or otherwise, where institutions can't go to the bond market themselves or go to other markets and find their own funds outside of state funds? Or philanthropic dollars or whatever, I don't know where else funds might come, grant dollars to support.
I'll defer to Director Gentile, but I'll give you my 2 cents on that. And one, obviously there's a difference between whether somebody has a capital dollars or operational dollars. And that may get beyond where we're talking about here, but on an ongoing basis, that's sort of the first sort of split between the two colors of the money that I would understand. But as far as going out, I think the biggest challenge would be how do you elicit excitement for raising money for what is perceived to be just regular day-to-day operations and maintenance. Even though we have a huge amount of backlog of deferred maintenance, to get our existing facilities that we already own up to sort of a consistent, let's say 90% or above daily operation condition. Not all buildings, obviously. Say that again, sorry.
To clarify, is more of a new buildings.
Right.
as opposed to operations and maintenance. I agree with trying to convince someone.
Okay, so so sure, for sure, to do new construction or major renovation, that would be definitely capital dollars. And obviously, I think there's the opportunity for a campus to raise money in other manners. Maybe that rolls into the match funding.
Yeah, real quick. So there's an authority at the state called the Tennessee School Bond Authority, that allows for higher education to take out bonds to build auxiliary buildings. Auxiliary like residence halls, cafeterias, parking decks, stadiums, as an example. And those are backed up first by the fees, residence fees, baseball game tickets, what have you, to build those. And then what allows for the low bond ratings are two things. First of all, is cross collateralized. There's TBR LGI, there's the UT system. And if one of those institutions in that system were to default or not be able to pay, the other institutions step in for it. That's how it works at the state level. And because of that, any other bonds are pretty much prohibited from institutions to take out. There has been discussion about extending TSSBA to non-auxiliary. That was a conversation that's been happening in the last year at the state level. And so essentially what that would mean would be institutions would raise mandatory fees that would be related to our tuition process here to build academic buildings. Right now, there's pretty much one institution that could do that. It's our flagship. The concern for other institutions would be, would the state then divert? Would the state then just assume that every other institution can self-bond? And so there's reluctance from institutions to go that direction. But if an institution was going to be able to take out bonds, they essentially have to get approval from TSSBA before they move forward with that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I was latching onto the philanthropic side of the question, saying that was available.
And that's true. Outside gifts are always available for that process too.
Are there any other questions or comments? Yeah.
When outside of our people, meaning our students and our faculty and our staff, I guess our biggest assets are probably our facilities. And when you look at that, I'm guessing that we're probably about $3 billion behind in deferred maintenance across what we want to get done. And at some point in time, I think that this body's going to have to really take a hard look at that and how we could address that. And if we don't, then the $3 billion has become $4 billion. I would hope as we go forward that we can maybe spend some significant time looking at that. Otherwise, we're going to have our facilities caving in around us, and then we'll just be going to build new ones. And sometimes, for a whole lot of different reasons, the ones we have in place already are could be refurbished and brought back to good use. And I know this isn't something that's unique to just higher education. I dare say that every K through 12 system in the state is having to deal with it also. So there's some reasonably innovative things that could possibly be done in that arena. And I would hope that as a group, we could take some look at those potentially.
I would just add to that this past session, I highlighted for me that time is now to have these conversations. We had a really good convening testimony with Senate Finance about capital maintenance. There's a lot of education that we can be doing as staff in collaboration with our institutions. And I walked away from the session actually thinking we need to make a report about this because there are assumptions. The right assumptions are that, yes, there's a huge deficit and need for capital maintenance. $3 billion might be an underestimate at this time, honestly. But also we get the counter questions. Well, what are institutions doing for M&O and general maintenance? And I think THEC can serve the role of bridging that knowledge base so that we can go after investment in the future.
Anyone else? Readiness to vote? Okay, then I will entertain a motion and a second on this agenda item. Okay. Madam Secretary?
Commissioner Brackett,
Aye.
Commissioner Matlock,
Aye.
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Chairman, you have 5 ayes.
Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you.
Appreciate you and your entire team for what you do. Our next item is the 2025 Outcomes-Based Funding Formula Review. Mr. Russell Van Zomeren, Senior Director of Fiscal Policy, will provide an overview of the agenda item and answer any of our questions.
That's right, any of them.
Before that should be fun. Before he gets started, real quick, the rationale behind this actually came from a conversation that I had with Chairwoman Scarlett earlier this year. We are going through our master planning process, of which you'll hear more about tomorrow. Quickly following that will be a review of our outcomes-based funding formula. Quality assurance funding formula, which attaches to that as well, is under review. There will come a time later this year with regards to quality assurance funding and outcomes-based funding formula where we come to you with recommendations. We wanted to be sure that we set the knowledge base again about how these run and quick observations that you might have right now so that when we come back later, we could have a more expansive conversation. So thank you, Chairwoman Scarlett, for that recommendation, and thank you, Russell.
Of course, good afternoon, members of the commission. Thank you for having me. As you might recall, in 2010 in the CCTA Act, THEC was tasked with coming up with some way of funding our institutions that was not based on enrollment, but instead based on the success that our institutions were able to provide both to their students and to the state. That idea sounds simple. I covered it in about 10 seconds there. It's actually somewhat complex and very innovative. We were the first in the state to do so, or first in the nation to do so. Today, we find ourselves in a situation where over half of the states have copied Tennessee in some way. 3 out of every 5 states at least do some portion of their operating budget using outcomes-based funding, and we feel pretty good about it as a model. What we do every 5 years is engage with this body, with that statutory review committee, and with stakeholders around the state to say, what about the model is working well? What about it is aligned with THEC's mission and vision for higher education or state priorities and needs? And what about it might need some tweaking? For today's presentation, I'll spend just a brief moment going over what is in the model today before I pivot to talking more about what that review process might look like this year. And I'll begin at a high level. There are 20 some outcomes in the outcomes-based funding formula. You have those in your materials today. I've bucketed the outcomes here for simplicity into 4 or 5 major buckets. And you can see in these pie charts what portion of funding each one of these things is responsible for. So on the university side, we think about completion. These are students earning associates, bachelor's, master's, PhDs, whatever it might be. That's covering a little over half of all the funding. You have efficiency for universities, that's awards per FTE or graduation rates, research, and then those progression metrics. On the community college side, very similar, though slightly different when you look at something like cross-sector engagement, that's dual enrollment, economic development, job placement, workforce training. All of these 20 outcomes work to serve the 5 or 6 buckets that you see on the screen here today. My point with the chart here is twofold. One, we're really driving towards specific things, and we have metrics that we use to get at these big buckets. But the more important thing is that we're incentivizing our institutions to be efficient, that we're incentivizing them to help their students succeed, work towards progression, maybe do more research on behalf of the state. 2, one of the things that I think gets lost when we talk about the outcomes-based funding formula, we have those 20 outcomes. Not all 20 of them impact the funding recommendation equally. In fact, you can see there's pretty big divides between how much, for instance, those progression metrics at the university sector account for about 10% of all funding, a relatively small portion, the enrollment, or completion portion accounting for a little over half. The outcomes-based funding formula also has focus population premiums. Those premiums are on the screen there in front of you, and these really serve to do 2 things. One, when you think about transitioning from an enrollment-based model to an outcomes-based model, one of the concerns I think the state and THEC would have had at the time and continue to have to this day is that institutions may choose to serve students who they think are most likely to hit these various outcome metrics instead of making sure that all of their students are prepared to reach those metrics. And so this does that task of making sure that institutions are able to provide resources for those students. That's both making sure that the institution has that want, that will to do so, but then two, that they have the funding available, right? As a student hits each one of the outcome metrics, if they are part of one of these groups, they'll be awarded bonus points, and you can see those on the screen. Not every one of the focus populations is about the student. One of them here you can see is actually about the award that the student receives. And there we're asking institutions and students to pursue degrees that are in STEM or healthcare fields. As those awards are granted to the student and seen in the institutional data, they will be counted for more. In this case, at least 1.8 more relative to that one outcome point for maybe a student who's graduating in a not high needs field. Brief demonstration, just how does this work conceptually? Of course, we're collecting data on these 20 outcomes and a few others, all of which inform our outcomes-based funding formula. We calculate a 3-year average. That 3-year average really serves to provide stability within the formula and some amount of predictability in the data. Those focus population premiums I just discussed, we'll apply those. We scale our data. This is largely to put things that are on, sort of different, wildly different metrics. Workforce training, for instance, is measured in hundreds of thousands of hours, whereas a graduation rate is less than 1, often 60, 70, whatever it might be, %. So scaling allows us to put those on the same, for lack of a better word, scale so that we can compare them. We apply institutional weights. We'll get to the weights a little bit later, but we do have the opportunity through this weighting process for our institutions to say, we are an institution through our mission that cares a little bit more about X or Y or Z. Maybe that's transfer, maybe that's workforce training, maybe that's research and development. Whatever that thing is for your institution, THEC will, through the outcomes-based funding formula, judge you more in the outcomes-based funding formula on your success in those metrics. And then the last two, we're just calculating the points and calculating the change. You can see that on the screen in front of you here. As an example, this is one of our institutions from the most recent year. So in 25-26, this formula version, they had 458 points. The prior year, 437. So an increase of 4.87%. This is a really critical part of the formula, this 4.87%. We are judging institutions on their ability to grow their outcomes relative to themselves, right? So institutions compete against themselves. They also compete against each other. I'm not looking to, one of our community colleges, or the formula is not looking to one of our community colleges and asking them to graduate, just as many students as some of our largest universities. What instead it asks our institutions to do is to increase their graduation numbers by the same proportion that our universities might graduate students. And that's true, again, within sectors too. So if you're an institution who, today is graduating relatively few students, the formula is asking you to do better, do more. Not necessarily as much as another institution, but to grow from where you are today. I'll show you an example here. So the institution on the left, a hypothetical institution, grew its outcomes by 5% in the most recent year. If every other institution in the States, on average, grew by 5%, there'd really be no change in that funding distribution. Everybody did the same thing, so as shares of funding, the money wouldn't move. Similar example, second one down, this institution grew, other institutions did not. The money would flow from the other institutions towards this institution. This isn't a zero-sum game. It's obviously oversimplified, but just a thought exercise to help you follow. That last piece, this is an institution that grew its outcomes by 5%, that we might think that they did pretty well that year. If other institutions are growing their outcomes by 10%, this institution would still cede funding to those better performing institutions. All right, I'll pivot us to the review process. Any questions on the formula? No, great. We'll get to the editing part. So Tennessee Code Annotated 497202 does task us, this body, with creating the formula and then reviewing that formula on an annual basis. We do this annually in what we call a technical review. So we're sort of checking for any minute errors that we might have in the formula that we need to clean up through policy. The larger policy setting conversation about what should be in the formula and how should those things be monetized, we save that for once every 5 years. And that's important to us because we want to provide institutions time and stability to actually respond to the formula. As an example, 6-year graduation rate is taking them at least 6 years to graduate those students. If you were to make a change to something like that, it's going to take institutions a while to respond to the incentive, and then maybe a similar amount of time for us to see that show up in our data. Throughout this year, our team will continue to check in with some of the key stakeholders, just thinking through this timeline. Spring and summer, we are doing background and context setting. We're reaching out to groups to see what ideas they might have. Obviously, Amanda is working on the master plan alongside that statutory committee. And as all of those things come into shape, we'll have maybe a bit better of an idea of what the key issues are going to be for the outcomes-based funding formula in the latter half of this year and into 2026. That's that last part here. Ideally, we'll have a new formula before you all in early spring 2026, either winter or last time the May commission meeting. That would allow us to use that formula in the fall recommendation next year. On the screen here, you can see what is required in statute for the formula to contain or address. And so you have things like student retention, timely progress, degree production, transfer. All of those are well and good. They are in the formula currently. The challenge I have when I speak to groups is really focusing on this first bullet points, that the outcomes-based funding formula really is a tool to help the state enforce and see through the vision set out in the master plan. And so for our state, as we're thinking through a new master plan, it's also appropriate that we have some time to think through how the outcomes-based funding formula might inform that master plan, or the master plan might inform the formula, excuse me. My last slide, and I believe Director Gentile sent these out to you before the meeting, are just some key considerations that I've asked my team to think about, that we take out to those stakeholder groups about what are the things in the formula that are working well, and what are the areas that we see need for improvement. This is my last slide. I'll take any questions, comments, considerations you have on OBF direction setting for the next 6 months. I defer to the commission.
Yeah, Commissioner.
Thank you. Back about 2 slides, you referenced length of time in school, and I think you used the term 6 years. I hear that talked about time. Are we weighting any of these more so than others? If we see a school that's not fulfilling that time, we think they're extended out, and that's not an efficient way to do that. Or are we showing that preferable when they shorten that time and maybe more?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. So one of the more powerful metrics, I showed that pie chart about, what influences funding. And one of the more powerful metrics in the formula currently is that 6-year graduation rate. And we had a robust discussion in 2022 about whether 6 years is the right number. I expect we'll have a similar discussion later this year about whether 6 years is the right number. But if an institution is increasing that efficiency as measured in that 6-year graduation rate, looking at our universities, it would do a pretty good job of increasing their share of appropriations in that year.
Thank
you. Real quick, just to clarify though, were you asking if they are not doing as well in a metric, let's say 6-year graduation rate as an example, would our weighting system increase it to incentivize it? Is that what you were asking? I would say that's actually not been, and Russ is smiling behind, that's not been, and I keep pointing him out, but he was here at the beginning of it. That's not been the philosophy in the past, that the commission would say, we are going to increase your weight. The weights have been more of I think, twofold. One is on the mission. If someone comes to us and they have doctorate degrees weighted high, but they don't have but one program in it, the commission would say typically that doesn't seem representative of your mission. And 2, if they're underweighting something that we think that they should weight higher, bachelor degrees being an example, because that is what the state wants more of. But I would say, at least from the time I've been on the commission as staff, that's a novel question as to whether the commission would step in to say, we need more of that out of you than what you're doing. That graduation rate is low. We're going to push you with a higher weight. That has not been discussed at the staff or the commission level. And I hope that we write that down as something for consideration, at the very least, to toss around.
Commissioner.
Thank you. I just wondered, are there any metrics you collect comparing how much students are paying for their degrees versus their job placement and salaries after graduation? And is that something that plays into the formula at all right now?
Currently, we don't have any metrics. Thank you for the question. Currently, we don't have any metrics that do this. We have explored this a lot more in the last few years, and we've seen other states start to go in that direction. I think as a metric, we can sort of have a policy conversation at the state level about whether that makes sense for something that we put in the outcomes-based funding formula. What my team is doing and what Amanda's team is doing is making sure that if and when the state wants to go in that direction, that we have the data to be able to do so.
Do we have the data to be able to do so?
Not today.
No.
Yeah, the data is quite limited at the state level about how much they can capture on it. It's getting better, and we are exploring other ways of finding better access to data that could be of help to us. We have recently set up an agreement with the U.S. Census Bureau so that we could be able to track where students are going afterwards and what their general salary is from that. But that wouldn't be student level data that we get in return. So there will always be limitations on where the model can go based on data. But that has been one that has come up a lot.
And just would the data be available at the next meeting before you finalize the outcomes based, or is it going to be like a while? It's still an ongoing process.
November. I'm hearing November.
Okay, we'll have the census data by then, but I don't think it would be at the student level data though. So we will not the information we would get from the state's TN data system, P20, it is limited in its ability to do so. Texas has a really good program for that for their technical colleges. Their performance funding is based on what the premium is that you're coming out with because of the access to the data that they have.
Chairman Smith, may I ask a question?
Please, Commissioner Stafford. Yes.
Russell, thank you for the very informative presentation, and I appreciate you pointing out the challenge to at least make sure that the focus population doesn't get taken advantage of, so to speak. And so I just wanted to make sure I'm clear in terms of how we monitor that. Obviously, we're collecting a lot of data, but what is the accountability? And if you covered that, I apologize if I missed it, but what's the accountability to ensure that the focus population is treated fairly?
Forgive me, Commissioner. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, so on one of the slides, you had the focus population, and you made the comment that you want to make sure that schools don't cater to those most likely to succeed and leave those who have a more challenging ability to succeed and they not get attention. How do we make sure that that doesn't happen?
That's a great question. Okay, I appreciate you clarifying. So the short answer is we're working on it. Those focus populations were put into place, I believe, at the inception of the formula and then revised upwards in the 2015 cycle. We have partnerships with SHIO. We're expecting them to come to Tennessee later this summer and basically answer the exact question that you're asking here, which is, are those focus populations at the right level? Right now, it's set up so that, a student in one group gets an 80% bump, two groups, 100% bump, so on and so forth. I think there's some question as to whether that's the right system for us going forward. And what we could really use is someone to come dig into Tennessee's data with an outside perspective and answer this question. Maybe we find that an adult student should be a 50% bump and a low-income student 70% or something like that. These are obviously hypotheticals, but we're excited to answer that question. I expect when we come before you in August, we'll have some more insights there.
Okay, so as I understand it, then there's further calibration that has to happen, and then that will ultimately serve as accountability.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I've been actively engaged with this formula for almost 30 years now. And I recognize this is the most important leverage that THEC has to assure that the master plan is fulfilled. Because nothing gets an institution's attention more specifically than how much money are they going to get. Fact that worked well with my children too. So what we're doing here, I think, is a monumental importance. You and I think Dr. Gentile wrote a paper a number of years ago identifying what the purpose of the outcome-based formula was about. Do you recall this? Because I brought this up before.
We said you, were you looking at Russell or?
Yeah. Well, whoever was, but
Someone.
THEC produced a document that talked about the importance of the leverage that occurs from within the application of the outcome-based formula. And I asked this at an earlier meeting that we ought to refresh that report as part of what the commissioners look at when we're examining the outcome-based formula. And the sequence of events here is equally important, and that is we have to have agreement on the master plan before we then drive that plan by the outcome-based formula. And I like the fact that they're occurring, it's sequentially, but in a real close timeline here within the next year, because I think that's going to be very, very important for how we assure the accountability of the state's investment in public higher education. You're looking at me with blank about that report.
Now you have a second for me. On the report, we'll find it.
Okay, well, I've got a copy of it, so.
OREA has also done, OREA, who Robert Quidmeyer works with, that's part of the comptroller's arm, Research of Education, has done some reports on the outcomes funding formula as well. I'm not sure maybe if that's what you're considering
Yeah,
in that.
well, I'll offline,
We'll figure it
I'll
out.
give you the title of
We
it.
produce so much, we just can't keep track of it all.
There you go.
Well, it's an important document because what it says is that part of the process is to create pain because that gets attention. And in the conversations with the FNA in the last couple of years, that question of holding to the outcome-based formula in the allocations that are made from the governor's budget is just really, really critical in order to drive the metrics that occur with the outcome-based formula. So that's why I think it's important. And I'm not sure, but I think Commissioner Stafford may be the only person who is a legacy member of this commission who was here the last time this revision was occurred. Is that a fair statement?
That-
Lay
For
Yes,
most
that
of-
is correct.
Most of the
Yeah.
commissioners, this is all new territory, correct? So it's well worth our time, and hopefully in August, we'll spend time addressing these key considerations that you have here, plus the others. So with that,
I was,
yes, go ahead.
sir, I was just gonna say with that, being one of the newest members, I just wanted to thank you very much for the lead time that we have to think about this and the thoughtful nature that you've undertaken as part of this process. It helps us prepare for what is ultimately a very important decision come next May or whenever. But thank you for being here today, of course.
Yeah, thanks. Ben. Vincent, all right.
And I will just add to that, I do remember now, a few years ago, we wrote a memo about the importance of not doing a hold harmless when it comes to funding formula.
Right.
And that was when you were the executive director back then
Yeah.
too, on why it's important for the funding formula to be followed every year.
Right, I've got a copy of that too.
Okay.
Kept everything. Thanks. With that, the next item ties in very directly with this, and that is the Quality Assurance Funding Review. And so Dr. Catherine Brackett, Senior Director of Academic Affairs, is going to provide an overview of the agenda items and of this agenda item and answer any questions. Dr. Brackett.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As our information item indicated, this presentation is going to provide a brief overview of quality assurance funding, offer a synopsis of the input we've received from the steering committee and other stakeholders, and explain the considerations and rationale informing the conversation. Sorry, I'll step back. I look forward to hearing your feedback and welcome any questions throughout the presentation. So as a historian, I would love to spend a lot of time talking about the history of quality assurance funding, but don't worry, I'm not going to do that. We'll be quick here. The quality assurance funding started in the 1970s as a mechanism to measure student learning and institutional effectiveness. In the current standards, institutions can earn an additional 5.45% above their operating budgets based on a handful of metrics that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Historically, QAF has been explained as part of the outcomes-based funding formula, or OBF, that you just heard about, and it's designed to consider academic offerings from a framework of quality and continuous improvement, which is a very important piece of academic program and assessment at any institution. QAF standards and scoring are revised every 5 years alongside the outcomes-based funding formula revisions. And institutional data collection and evaluation also occurs in a 5-year cycle. QAF currently includes 7 standards, which you can see on this slide: general education, major field assessment, academic programs that are either specialty accredited or they undergo a program evaluation, institutional satisfaction, student equity, job placement for our community colleges, and student access and success. Each of these standards has its own requirements for data collection, reporting, and scoring. The standards use a combination of national standardized tests and surveys alongside locally developed assessment tools and qualitative and quantitative measures to assess quality in academic program and the academic programming and the student experience. All right, guys, there we go. All right, so I want to cover for the next few minutes some of the considerations for the upcoming cycle when it comes to revising what's included in QAF. So in addition to the considerations that always factor into these conversations, there are some additional things coming in this cycle that you're all aware of already, but it's worth mentioning here. So first, the legislature recently approved expanded ability for delegated authority for program approval. Conversations around what delegated authority might look like will continue over the summer, but decisions about how to streamline program approval while maintaining quality will happen in conversation with these QAF standards. Second, TX staff are also working to bring post-approval monitoring into QAF in a more streamlined and thoughtful manner, allowing check-ins on program health and effectiveness at each stage of the program lifecycle, from approval to maturity. Third, in partnership with stakeholders from around the state, THEC is working on a new master plan for higher education. And performance funding will be in conversation with priorities that have already been identified in the master planning process. And finally, as you've just heard, OBF is also under review. And our hope is to have QAF and OBF complement one another without duplication. So discussion around OBF will inform QAF as well. Stakeholder engagement is well underway for quality assurance funding. Conversations with stakeholders began in fall of 2024 when the program review rubrics were revised in partnership with QAF coordinators. So the folks at our institutions that are doing the on-the-ground work of collecting data and reporting it. The results of that effort are streamlining 3 separate rubrics into one combined rubric that will be distributed to our partners soon. Internal meetings began before these stakeholder meetings and continued last summer. In winter 2024, THEC convened QAF coordinators to reflect on the process and to talk through strengths and opportunities for the next cycle. THEC staff also met with any campus or system representatives interested in discussing QAF further. Each of these conversations has informed our process and suggested a path forward. THEC staff has also met with external experts in the field of assessment and quality, including representatives of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, AACNU, the Center for Community College Student Engagement, affectionately known as CESE, the National Survey for Student Engagement, NESE, and the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA. At the end of April, THEC Chief Academic Officer Dr. Julie Roberts discussed QAF with the Chief Academic Officers at a convening at Tennessee Tech's campus, providing another opportunity for feedback. Over the course of our conversations with stakeholders, we've gotten a lot of feedback, some of which has been positive and some of which has been more constructive. We're not going to talk about it all today. I just have a couple of highlights to go over for you. We got to start with the positives though. First of all, we heard that there was value in having quality measures across the state's institutions. So having a standardized set, a ruler, if you will, to measure what is happening in programming and with student experience in the state was seen as valuable. Our campuses also use a lot of the data that's collected for QAF for other purposes, and that includes institutional and programmatic accreditation. And then finally, QAF data has resulted in some meaningful conversations about student experiences and the quality of programming that campuses are offering. So, as I alluded, we also heard lots of constructive feedback. Some of the standardized assessment tools did not always provide information that campuses viewed as helpful or informative of their program health. And for any of these examples or points, I'm happy to go into some examples if you would like. Campuses expressed a desire for more choice in the data that they were collecting and the assessment mechanisms too, to better reflect and assess their campus initiatives and their campus identity and strategic priorities. We heard a lot of feedback on scoring and evaluation. That was probably the most consistent piece of feedback that we received. And there was question about whether or not some of the evaluation mechanisms incentivize better performance and continuous improvement as intended. And there was discussion of the usefulness of the more qualitative aspects of the reporting. And finally, an overarching piece of feedback was that some of the measures did not always correspond with institutions' conceptions of quality. And again, I'm happy to go into more detail about these points, or I can continue.
Madam Chair.
Can you give an example of concepts of quality that are not agreed to?
Sure. So I think several of the standards as currently conceived require some qualitative reports or some measuring of certain things that the campuses felt that they are doing anyway and that they didn't necessarily need to be measured on. Or there were mixed pieces of feedback on, is this actually telling us something about if our program is quality or not? So another example was the national surveys used. Campuses in the past were given a set of questions that the students that completed the survey would answer, and there was some desire to have more choice to ensure that the questions that students were being asked aligned with the realities of the institution. Does that answer the question?
Sounds like we just need to come up with a common definition of what we think quality means, right? Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
This is not an important question, but it's one that I get confused on. We've got so many QAFs, THC, ATPs. I need a cheat sheet for all these things we go with. We have lots of that.
You know, we actually used to have, this is under a prior communications director, and I'm looking at Jesse now, perhaps. We used to have a pamphlet actually that would break all these acronyms down. Not just ones that we use, but also across higher education. We can re-up that and add more because I'm sure they've only been added to, not been taken away.
There's a commercial back in Knoxville that runs on the radio. It goes through this whole list of questions about all these AECs and EECs, and at the end of it, it says, that's A-OK. So that's right. That's where I'm trying to get to A-OK.
Yes.
Yes. Any other questions or comments?
I just had a question. Can you talk about what sort of next steps in terms of accepting the constructive feedback and how you all are working together to come up to a better solution or, pathway forward?
I would love to. That is the next slide. But before I get to that, I do want to talk a little bit more about the rationale that's been informing this conversation, because I do think it will help to put the way that we've been engaging with stakeholders into context a little bit more. And then I will absolutely answer the question about next steps. So again, in addition to the timing questions that are involved with QAF, there are another of other considerations that are informing how we're thinking about quality assurance funding, how we're thinking about the new program approval process, and other things that have traditionally been within the Bureau of Academic Affairs and Workforce Alignment. So in the next cycle, we're hoping to look at academic programs holistically and across the entire cycle, as I mentioned. So from approval to post-approval monitoring to OBF and QAF. And so providing very clear path from approval to entering these funding checks, if you will. And this will hopefully allow a fuller picture of program health while aligning and streamlining processes for the campuses. Second, QAF can and should encourage continuous improvement and meaningful conversations. And so we want to ensure that the standards and the scoring that are used are relevant to the campus missions and to their strategic goals. We intend to provide some flexibility for campuses to emphasize aspects of quality aligned to their missions, strategic plans, and student populations. We also would like to streamline processes as much as possible. I know you hear a lot about that from THEC staff, and it's sincere. We do want to make sure that all of these processes are rationalized and are talking to each other in meaningful ways. So we did hear from some campuses that collecting and reporting for QAF could be burdensome and that the data collected did not always align. And so making sure that these processes are woven together in a sustained, meaningful conversation, I think will make all that data collection and reporting make sense and will also be more informative internally and at the state level. Our campuses have quality data reporting that's mandatory for other purposes. And so as many places as possible, we are working on aligning those requirements with other processes. So again, speaking to both institutional accreditation and programmatic requirements and being aware of the changing landscape in that arena as well. And then finally, we want to ensure that quality assurance funding considers program health and student success from similar themes, but a distinct vantage point from the outcomes-based funding formula. Where OBF considers a range of institutional outputs, QAF can consider program and student success from a quality and experience framework. Both of these pieces are valuable in assessing the value, health, and success of our institutions and programs. I lied, I'm sorry, it wasn't the next slide. It's the next one. Okay, so in terms of moving forward, based on the conversations that we've had thus far across the spectrum of stakeholders, the most consensus is around the following focus areas. academic program quality through program accreditation or program review, and also assessment of general education programs, student success, and student satisfaction and engagement. To assess academic program quality, we're proposing a continuation of either specialty program accreditation for those that can be accredited, or program review using the revised rubrics I mentioned earlier. I'll speak to next steps on the rubric and validation in just a second. We also recommend continuing with general education assessment as it's a critical piece of accreditation standards, but we would like to provide additional flexibility for campuses to submit program level assessment data and analysis rather than requiring a standardized test. We heard that major field tests and licensure data is helpful to our campuses and required for accreditation reporting. So we recommend keeping it with the same efforts toward flexibility and applicability as elsewhere. And finally, a student satisfaction and engagement standard would utilize nationally validated student and alumni surveys that compare institutions to their peers. At the same time, we intend to offer campuses more autonomy in selecting which themes, topics, and questions could be used. And so now we have next steps. Thanks for your patience. So our next steps in the broadest sense are going to be to finalize the standards, to finalize and communicate scoring and evaluation metrics, and to support and plan alongside our campus partners, helping to share information and ensure that they are ready to adopt the changes, and that any way we can support them in data collection, we can do that for them. And finally, implementation. As part of the implementation, in consultation with the Commission and other stakeholders, we'll also be working on policy updates to unify the program approval process, post-approval monitoring, and quality assurance funding, and to account for the recent changes to delegated authority. I also do want to mention, under that finalize and communicate scoring, we have contracted with a nationally recognized rubric and assessment expert to ensure the evaluation metrics and scoring will evaluate what we're hoping to capture while addressing concerns raised by our institutional partners. So all of the next steps that we are hoping to take, all of this is taken because of the feedback that we've received. So all, including yours. So what we've heard from our stakeholders has been woven into the suggestions we've made today. And there's still plenty of room for adding to the conversation. And so as we work toward finalizing the standards and start working on scoring, we want to ensure that your thoughts and priorities are reflected. And so I have two primary questions for you today, and I'm obviously happy to answer any others. But from your perspective, are there additional quality measures we should consider? And then second, what other priorities do you want us to keep in mind as the work continues? Oh.
Anybody? Well, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this commission has demonstrated in the last two meetings that it takes the program approval process very, very seriously and rigorously. The best we can do with the program approval policy is to approve a program on the promise that what was said is going to be delivered in future years. And the only measure of that, I think, and correct me, Dr. Brackett, if you disagree with this, was the QAF. But the standards within the QAF didn't align directly with the approval process. And in fact, in some ways, it went in completely different directions. A lot of that is valuable, so I wouldn't dispute that. But the ultimate question was, were we able to do on the campus what we said we were going to do when we got the program approved in the first place? I'm sure this has been a part of your conversation. Could you speak more clearly so that we are confident that the good work we're doing on the approval end has consequences for the continuation of the programs?
I'm happy to answer as best as I can, and Dr. Roberts, feel free to jump in if you would like. I would say that historically, there have been a couple places where there were tests to see if the goals set in the new program approval process were being met. Whether it was in post-approval monitoring, where you did have a very specific metric that was being measured, basically enrollment graduation, or quality assurance, or OBF. Now there's a more significant delay in the measures there. Are they meeting the projections that they set out? Are they providing the supports for students to graduate on time, et cetera? It's absolutely been a part of the conversation, ensuring that all these pieces are talking to each other in a meaningful way, and that the metrics that we're asking for on the front end align with what is happening on the back end. And regardless of where the conversation lands on what delegated authority is going to look like, we are doing everything that we can to make sure that there's alignment and that there's a rationality to all of it, and that the priorities of the commission and the institutions and our students are reflected.
Yes.
Just one, thank you, Katie. That was very well said. One other piece specific to post-approval monitoring, and we're still figuring that piece out exactly how we're going to integrate it into the quality assurance funding. But for the list that I would bring to you frequently with the folks that weren't performing well, that would delay them going to QAF. So we're really thinking of moving away from that and putting them into QAF sooner. So functionally, what that would do is if you're a low-producing program, you're not being evaluated on the funding side of the quality assurance funding. It was just kind of living in the limbo list, I'm going to call it from now on. So we're hoping that we can pull that in. And then that puts a dollar amount to the quality of that program. So.
Clarification.
Let's correct her. No, I'm kidding. No clarification on that. No, but I think over the next couple of months, especially as I mentioned in the last committee meeting, in August, having a work session about that delegated authority when it comes to academic programs. When I thought through that legislation, quality assurance funding was first in front on my mind. Part of the conversation that you are going to be having as a commission over the summer with us one-on-one, and then at that meeting is, when it comes to academic program approval, what are your no-goes as a commission? What is it that you're looking at? Most importantly, job placement, commitment of salary premium, et cetera. Think through, as commissioners, if you're going to vote no on an academic program, why is that? And therefore, if you're going to delegate to the staff or to the executive director, I see QAF as being the place where you can say, oh, we're going to check that on the back end. Not only to verify that what you said to the commission when you approved that program, but also to hold the staff accountable that we are letting programs through that meet your needs. So I think I look forward to answers to these questions in August. Another example of how QAF can be utilized is to streamline our academic program approval process. We have talked before about, we do an external review as part of the academic program approval process. That can add time to an institution getting us their academic program for your review. Could that be put into the back end? We require an external review of your program as part of QAF, but not on the front end. These are things that could be changed in this process to streamline on the front end, but to hold them more accountable. And I'll go a third. Right now, and I can't give you the history, and I don't think people who've worked at THEC for 25 years could, but this is worth 5.45% of the overall formula. Why 0.45%? Only God knows. But 5.45%, could it be worth more? Could it be worth more in the funding formula? I have been open to that. And as someone who worked on the OBF side of it, I think that this could and should be worth more. This is the canary in the coal mine to make sure that we're not producing outcomes that are dwindling in quality. So over the summer, we'll come back to this conversation. Yes, we've heard from campuses and stakeholders, but Victoria and I were talking. She used to run QAF. She had never talked about QAF, the process and review process in front of the commission. It never rose to that attention, and I always thought that was misplaced because this is, again, that check on what you guys do in the front end to make sure that institutions are following through. And that's all I've got to say.
Oh, it's a great point. Great point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is the binding.
Dr. Smith, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, yes. Madam Chair.
And this is, I'm not
Just heard
exactly too
voice
sure
from the-
where to ask this question. But I'll just kind of throw this out. Number one, I want to reinforce the importance that the master plan plays with the QAF and the OBF.
Mhm.
I'll throw an ROI to go with that, right? But realistically, I mean, there's really, what is the what is the return on investment for a student?
Exactly.
Right, and I think that's really important as we continue to keep this very student focused. But it brings a question, this is tied back to what Dr. Jomchek said that earlier. After receiving an associate's degree, which is about 60 credits, you then go to a 4-year program, get another 60, it's 120 credits for a period of, we're now saying 6 years, it's not 4 years, right? I think it'd be valuable at some point for the commission to understand the history behind why we moved from a 2 and 4 year to a 3 and 6 year plan of action where we could potentially move it back, but it's not my question. My question, and I root this in a conversation I had recently with a freshman at a local public university. He took AP courses throughout his high school pathway, and then he gets into having to take gen ed classes at this university, and he's having to retake the exact same classes, and they're all asynchronous. So he's like, you're pressing a button like, yeah, I got it. And it's a bit of a waste of his time, certainly a waste of our money. So then it makes me question the 120 credits or 60 credits, the 6 years versus 3 years, and then the gen ed. Like, I don't know where to ask this question, but how do we rethink what really is required of students to step into the jobs of today and tomorrow? And I'm questioning some of those requirements.
I don't mind taking a stab at this. I know Secretary Hargett has brought up the idea of a 3-year degree. And so we've just been doing some research behind the scenes around what that would look like. That hasn't happened in Tennessee. And I don't actually think it's happened at most of our neighboring states. But those models are out there. And we're also, as many of you are aware, we've been working really closely with other state partners, especially labor, around thinking about micro-credentials, stacking credentials. How do you assign meaningful credit to quality non-degree credentials? So where I don't think the conversation, at least we haven't been having any major conversations around, what if gen ed didn't exist, those kinds of things, but we have been thinking about how can we reframe education in a way that's not this traditional, a high school student going to a 4-year degree or doing 2 years at community college right into another 60 credits at a university. So I would say that now's the time for us to be having these conversations, because I think everyone's much more open to what higher ed could look like than it has been in the past.
As an employer and spending a lot of time with other employers, I'm looking for competencies. I want to know that someone, besides the fact they need to show up and be able to read, write, and do arithmetic, like I want them to understand the basic competencies. And I think that is something that I'd love for our colleges and universities to explore, and for us to think about differently. How do we really think about post-secondary point, whether this happens with this master plan or kind of future conversations? I don't know, but I'm just not sure where to ask this question when it comes to the money. If the money is truly incentivizing things, then how do we operate differently to make sure that Tennessee is best in class, not following and trailing behind people that have copied us 20 years ago?
Well, and I will actually, Katie, I'd like you to speak to some of the Katie has some ideas here.
Just for background, before I came to THEC, I worked for 3 years on a gen ed revision at one of our locally governed institutions. So that's been a big part of the conversation. I have to commend a lot of our institutions, including almost all of our public universities and the community colleges, for spending a lot of time thinking about how to reorganize their general education curricula to be more relevant. And in fact, many of them now, if they didn't already, have program outcomes for their gen ed that are focused on skills rather than any kind of disciplinary outcomes. So they have reorganized some of those courses, provided more flexibility for students, where students are able to take things that may seem or actually be more directly related to their major. I think there's also some really interesting research about the skills developed outside the major when it comes to communication, critical thinking, team building, etc. That has been conducted by a number of organizations, higher ed focused organizations. And I think that many of my colleagues would argue that general education prepares students beyond their major, so that if there is a substantial change in the job market and they do have to pivot, that Gen Ed Foundation can help them to do that easier.
And one last thing, from a practical perspective, we actually Katie pitched a QAF standard specifically dealing with skills-based. And so some of the metrics that we have proposed apparently aren't great, we've heard. So that's something that we can re-up that conversation as well.
Well, in the spirit that we finish each other's sentences, I'm listening to us talk about 120 hours and 3 years and 6 years and 4 years, and none of that is really relevant. In fact, the whole concept of a credit hour as a unit of measure in higher education, and Lou, if I talk about history here and I'm wrong, correct me, was actually created as a necessity to determine retirement for faculty in terms of how many units of time they had spent in years of service. Competency-based is really what everybody wants at the end of the day. And as you said, as an employer, I want that competency. As a citizen, I want these to be competent, not only just in skills, but in certain mindsets, civic responsibilities, civic duties, making good judgments, maybe even more important than being a good decision maker. Tennessee set the example with outcome-based funding. We went boldly where nobody had gone before. And it may very well be a moment for Tennessee to consider that putting a greater attention to outcomes-based credentialing is the way to go. That is a torturous path, but it's one everybody is asking for. And at a time in which every time I pick up a trade publication, the question is, what is the quality of a post-secondary education? And is it worth the kind of investment? And we have a public that is losing faith in our ability to answer that question in a way that they find meaningful. And here we are on the precipice of possibly making a good attempt at an answer to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
With that heavy thought, let's talk about binding tuition authority. Another made up concept.
But before we move
Please
on,
do.
I would like to just say, I mean, I think it's worth noting along those lines, my employer, which is in the S&P 100 and a $300 billion market cap company, has just offered a fellowship for graduating seniors in high school to teach them within the company how to be successful. And so I think that that's just a data point that we all should know is happening out there, along TL's point about what is competency and where are they going to get the best learning
from that. So
Excellent.
If I can interject before you go on, Mr. Van Zomeren, we're throwing lots of big philosophical questions at you. I recognize it is 4:30 in the afternoon.
Oh.
There is coffee in the back, I believe. I had to remind Lou of that from the fourth row. Please do get some caffeine, but we also recognize that these questions start today. We'll be revisiting back with you over the summer, specifically on the tuition policy. Just wanted to remind you of that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you again for having me. As you all are aware, recent legislation changed THEC's purview over a whole host of policy levers, and one of those, of course, is the binding tuition. The legislation, as approved, requires this body to review tuition and other fees. That's something you've already been doing, and that's part of the operating budget process that we put before you twice a year. The language you see now is where we start to see some changes. The commission, of course, must set at least one binding maximum increase, what historically we would have called that range, and then, of course, is permitted to set additional maximum increases by institution. TX staff are bringing this item to you today for two reasons. First, we'll need to modify THEC policy. This could happen in August or November of this year to make sure that it's in alignment with state statute. And as part of that policy revision, this body may choose to add additional provisions that go beyond perhaps what the state statute requires. So as an example, you may choose to make a requirement that the commission sets two ranges, one for universities and one for community colleges, or something along those lines. Second, we've heard from this body a desire for richer data and a more complete narrative around what our institutions need as it's related to tuition and fees or appropriations more generally. It's a big question. It's one we intend to tackle over the summer. We've partnered with the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, NCHEMS, who created the original tuition model, to come and work with us over the summer. And we'll have them here in August to present their findings on this question. Great question. All right, so there's a couple of considerations that we might look to as we think about what does this body intend to do with the binding tuition authority going forward? So you may say that, we intend to use this power to maintain affordability, safeguard investments in financial aid. Director Gentile referenced that earlier, provide financial stability for institutions, account for cost increases, whatever it might be. But each one of these considerations might lead you down a different path in terms of where you want to go in policy and in terms of what data THEC staff can put before you that would help you make those decisions. I'll give an example that we have from other states on how they think about tuition, and this may help inform our conversations again, not only today, but in the future. So you'll see, and other states can check multiple boxes here, so the percents get a little wonky, but you'll see that you kind of have two major buckets there that other states are thinking about their tuition setting authority. One, of course, this is set at the institution level. One, of course, this is set at the institution level or back or budgetary needs. So essentially, the statewide perspective is more hands-off. The institutions are more hands-on. Conversely, almost the exact opposite, tuition should be as low as possible. That's, a philosophy that would encourage more state involvement. And then thirdly, no statewide tuition philosophy, also a possibility. Interestingly, those ones down at the bottom that very few states picked, so most states are not thinking about their tuition authority as a means to ensure quality. They aren't necessarily concerned with predictability, or nor are they interested in tying it to some metric of inflation. This is the big question that I think we need to answer over the coming months or years. It's part of that master plan process that we'll be doing, and part of our work, not only with tuition, but also with OBF. And as Stephen mentioned, this body now has purview over state scholarships as well. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can answer the question and then use our policy levers to inform practice. I believe Director Gentile sent you these questions. Happy to have the conversation with you all here today or throughout the summer and into the fall, really thinking through what is it that you all need from the THEC staff in order to be able to use this policy to, implement whatever changes you might wish to see in tuition setting. With that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions or observations from the committee members?
Yes, I know John, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, is this the conclusion of the presentation?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay. I think it's worthy, just to note as a commission, to, as we go about, this question, in response to the recent legislation, to better understand, how we make a decision that is, that is fair across the state of Tennessee, that is fair across, all the students, their families, the universities. I, of course, would like to keep tuition as low as possible. But, I think that we need to be thoughtful about how we, as we set, a tuition range for one university versus another university, why better articulating why we make the decision that we did in the event that they are different, and be thoughtful about that. We also, I think, should consider what our role is vis-a-vis the individual boards of the universities of those institutions, and our role and how we are aligned and looking out for the best interests of those students, their families, the universities, the state at large. And so those are just some of the comments that I have that I shared with the executive director in our prep call that just wanted to share with my fellow commission members.
May I ask in response to that first point, is another way of saying that is that we're gonna have different ranges for institutions, we better have a really good reason for that.
Open to discussion as we further explore this, but yeah, that's certainly my starting point.
That's really helpful. Yeah. Thank you. I know the comptroller could not be here today, but he sends some thoughts along. Robert Whitmire, who is the lead staffer for THEC purposes for the comptroller, is here. And I mentioned OREA earlier, the Office of Research, Education, Accountability. He serves as a chief analyst in that office there. Hello, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Gentile, for that introduction. I am Robert Whitmire. I'm a research analyst in the comptroller's office, but I do serve as his primary staffer for all things THEC. The comptroller asked me first to send his regards and his regrets that he couldn't be here this afternoon, but very much looks forward to joining the full commission tomorrow morning. He also just wanted me to highlight his particular interest in this specific agenda item. For one, to emphasize the importance of understanding the change in authority and how important the policy writing process will be as we engage with THEC staff to elaborate on the new statutory authority that the General Assembly granted THEC, particularly since it offers more statutory authority on top of the binding range authority that already exists. And I'm sure he'll communicate this tomorrow, perhaps during the legislative update agenda item. But a discussion point worth considering, and Commissioner Rader just mentioned this himself, is what this new authority, the implications this new authority has on those relationships with institutional local governing boards, professionally and especially procedurally. So what are the procedures going to look like when they're in place? How do we communicate with boards about their needs? So I think the comptroller's priority in this field is that local governing boards have every tool at their disposal to make productive and efficient decisions for their institutions. I'll keep my comments brief and close with that, but I appreciate a quick moment to represent the comptroller's interests this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, if not, you got off easy.
Thank you.
I will just add for further consideration over the next few months. The binding range authority is a relatively new authority that THEC has going back to 2017 with the Focus Act. I believe that it was in direct response to how institutions responded coming out of the pandemic, where some institutions increased tuition by 12, upwards to 15%. And oftentimes this commission has had under the late great Commissioner Frank Watson out of Memphis, anything above zero is too high. And I contrast that with protecting students from having to go through another 13% increase world. And so, this is different. This is not adding to that conversation as far as the statutory ranges are concerned. But when we think about what you would like to see from staff when it comes back from what we are recommending, that is part of my consideration that I always think of. Second is, again, safeguarding financial aid investment. I have long said, or thought at least, but said internally with staff that why would TBR not go to the top of our range when they have Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Reconnect to ensure that full tuition is covered? That said, the range increased to 6.5% this year, and TBR came out well below that cap. And so, that's something for us as staff to consider when we're talking about safeguarding financial aid. What might be the behavioral responses that institutions have given the financial aid that we have? I think my prior thoughts on that were checked this year. But I welcome and invite and require and greatly require for us as we develop a policy to help think through what your philosophical boundaries are on tuition this summer. Thank you.
Well, that's not a bad segue into our next agenda item so how's the lottery doing? And where can we buy tickets as we depart from here? So Mr. Tim Phelps, Senior Director of Grant and Scholarship Programs, is going to provide us an overview of the agenda item and answer any questions. Mr. Phelps, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the recent attention regarding a drop in lottery revenues and legislation which makes sports wagering funds available only in the case of a shortfall in lottery scholarship expenditures, we wanted to provide the commission with an update and some scenarios which show how the current year and next year may potentially play out. So for the current year of 24-25, we estimate that net lottery proceeds of about $412 million. And the net lottery proceeds, that is the amount that is transferred to the state after the lottery corporation pays their bills. These transfers are done on a quarterly basis. The 412 million is an estimate that's calculated after transfers through the third quarter. And to put that amount in perspective, the original low end of that range adopted by the funding board in November was 456 million. And so looking at adding that 412 million, you can see there's 83 million also in sports wagering privilege tax. And that brings our revenues up to 495 million. We estimate lottery expenditures in administration is going to come in at around 484 million. So for this year, we have a surplus of about 11 to 12 million.
Tim, may I ask for clarification? When you said
Yes.
the low estimate for projection, that was from last year?
Yes, so the state funding board meets each November, and the lottery corporation provides an estimate in what they think net lottery proceeds, what they will come in. The fiscal review committee also does that same estimate. And then the funding board takes those two and then adopts a range. And the low end of that range for the current year was the 456. So that's the most recent estimate that we have that the funding board adopted. However, when we look at what we've received or what the state has received through the first three quarters, we're on track to be well below the 456. So ballpark around 40 to 45 million less. Okay. And I believe the lottery corporation just had their board meeting on Monday, and I'll get to some of the information that they shared with me yesterday. But their latest estimate is come in around 425, 426 million, somewhere in that range.
And that's before sports wagering.
Correct. That's just net lottery proceeds. That doesn't include the sports wagering money. So, and I will say the 83 million that we've estimated, the amount that was provided to the state funding board in November, that was around 74 million. So sports wagering, the privilege tax is doing much better than anticipated. And again, these are our estimates looking at the amount of sports wagering privilege tax that's transferred to the state on a monthly basis. And then obviously, like I mentioned, the net lottery proceeds are transferred on a quarterly basis. So again, our surplus this year is about 11 to 12 million. If you look at and compare that to the surplus we had for fiscal year 24, that was about 124 million. So we are significantly down this year. And it's been over 100 million for the last 3 fiscal years at a minimum. So if you look ahead to 25, 26, our current projection, again, that the 460 is what we project the net lottery proceeds, or the funding board projected the net lottery proceeds to be. We essentially estimated a 1% increase in the scholarships and administration. You're looking at a $28 million deficit there. Historically, when the funding board adopts those ranges for the out year, they will estimate about a 1% increase. So if you look at the 412 that we project this year, and then you take 1% above that, we land at the 416. Again, looking at a deficit there of about 72 million. And then if we just simply say, what's a middle of the road projection, then we come in with a deficit of about 50 million. So obviously you can see in the 25-26 year, the sports wagering is not included in the numbers. And that goes back to the legislation that I mentioned that removes the sports wagering from a source, or as a funding source for the education scholarships. The legislation that enacted the Education Freedom Scholarships removed that. However, there was language that was included in the final bill, which does require sports wagering to be used for any deficit for scholarship expenditures. And that money is used as a funding source before any excess is transferred to the construction and maintenance for public school buildings. So.
Yes.
I should know
Matlock.
this, I apologize.
Yeah.
Help me with that 80% privilege tax. I'm not clear on how that function comes through the wagering.
Yeah, so it's a part, and I don't know that I can specifically say it's how it plays into, but essentially it's 80% of what the amount that the Sports Wagering Council receives on behalf of the online sports betting. So the law says 80% of that goes to fund scholarships and lottery funded scholarships.
So if I'm, and I'm not, but if I am sports betting, the tax is paid by the participant or the company that receives the money? Or?
Yes, sir. That's my understanding, is it's paid by the person who creates the account and places the bets and things like that.
And they're aware of that, the individual out here in the John Q. Public, he knows that.
Yeah, and I may have to defer to someone who knows better than I do, but again, it's just a.
You're not a betting
tax.
man. Is that,
I don't have a sports betting account, Commissioner Matlock, so I'm not 100% certain. And I don't know if Scott may have. No. No problem. But essentially it's a funding source for us that comes to and helps pay for the lottery funded scholarships. So apologize that I don't have more detail specifically on that. So really the question is, why is this happening? And so, like I said, I contacted our friends at the Lottery Corporation. They do a fantastic job. to get some information. Again, their board meeting was on Monday, and they provided me with some data that was shared with their board. And average year-over-year lottery sales among U.S. lotteries are down just over 10%. Average year-over-year sales of Mega Millions are down almost 25%. Average year-over-year sales of Powerball are down just over 55%. And then one of the contributing factors for lottery sales being down is sports betting. And so average year-over-year sales in states where sports betting is permitted, those lottery sales are down about 9.5%. And even in states where sports betting is not permitted, lottery sales are down about 8.5%. So then the next question is, how was Tennessee impacted? Because those are the national statistics. Here in Tennessee, total lottery sales are down almost 11%. And that is the third highest decrease out of the 14 states that permit sports betting. And sales of instant games, and instant games are your scratch-offs, they make up about 80% of revenues. Those are down almost 6%. So I think it's fair to say whether you're talking the drawing style games or the instant games, it's tough all over for lotteries across the country. So, and I'll pause there and see if there are any other questions that anybody has at this point.
Well, did I understand you to say that they're obligated to make up the deficit?
Correct.
So if that's the case, what are we worried about? And how long are they going to, before they catch on that this isn't really working for them?
Yeah. So two things that I would say we're worried about is that we're still essentially, for the most part, for us to make any future improvements for lottery scholarship programs, we need the lottery revenues to once again, or to rebound. And it's difficult to say, Chairman Smith, if this is a one-time issue or if it's a recurring issue for several years. And so, and I'll get to some of the changes that we made to lottery scholarship programs in just a moment. But when you're talking about just essentially breaking even, then again, there's no room for improvement to programs, whether those are making changes to each scholarship program or whether you're looking at increasing award amounts for the students. Like we mentioned, keeping up with the financial aid award amounts, keeping up with tuition and trying to keep pace. Then if you don't have excess money, then you don't have the ability to do that. So that would be my response.
So two separate questions. So who's obligated to make up the difference?
When the sports wagering funds come in before they are transferred to it's public school construction and maintenance. So before that money is transferred to that account, if there is a deficit in the lottery scholarships, they take and make that difference up first, and then they'll transfer the rest to the public school.
And how big is that pot of money? The construction, whatever you just described.
It hasn't started yet.
It will. So going forward, that sports wagering, think of that 83.1.
Right. Okay.
That is in the future going to be the construction pot.
I see.
So that is thank you. That is creating that new construction pot for K-12, and I believe it's administered by the treasurer, state treasurer.
Yep.
If there's going to be a deficit, they'll first pay down that deficit, and the rest of it will go into that pot for distribution that future year.
And is that pot funded in the governor's budget every year? Is that?
I think it was by law that the sports wagering will go into that pot, and that's where it goes. It's not in the governor's budget. It's by law. Lou's nodding his head.
Okay. And then am I correct in remembering what you specifically said last year was on projection? Is this just an anomaly for this year, or have we seen the percentages that you described as it relates to sports betting eating away at the lottery funds for Tennessee over a number of years, because sports betting isn't just new this year?
Yeah. So the Lottery Corporation is the best entity to answer that question. But when I posed that question to them, then they have said, yes, it is sports betting is one of the contributing factors. in eating into the lottery sales.
I was just gonna suggest that, I mean, if it was relatively normal last year and it's more problematic this year, we also currently are facing significant economic headwinds as it relates to inflation and other pressures that normal Americans are feeling every day, which may also be eating into their ability to purchase a lottery ticket while they're at the gas station like they used to.
Yes.
It's also a lot easier to do sports wagering than lottery. As someone who doesn't carry much cash, you have to have cash, right, to pay for lottery tickets and everything else. Whereas you can do sports betting from the ease of your phone. That might be a limitation. What stood out to me, though, I think you said that in states with sports wagering, sports betting, lottery sales are down 9.5%. In
Correct.
states without sports wagering, it's down
still down 8.5%.
8.5%.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can hang all of our hats on the sports betting
Yeah.
taken away from it. I think there are other factors playing through to it, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and that leads into my next slide here is that the deficit that we're facing for 25-26 it's not entirely due to decreasing lottery revenues. In 2022, we did expand the lottery program significantly, and that included increased award amounts for the Hope Scholarship. And also we expanded several programs, dual enrollment grant being one of those programs. And you can see the increase in participation and expenditures for the program specifically. And we highlighted the TCATs just to show that they have significantly increased their participation and their the number of students. But we show 68 million there as our projection for what we're going to spend this year. It's going to come in, or what we spent so far, but our expenditures are going to be around 70 to 71 million. So that's also a factor in this as well.
I would just add in, like, that's my biggest concern right there, Chairman. When you asked what are we concerned about, my biggest concern is that we don't know where dual enrollment is going. In fact, at lunch, several of us are sitting around a table, and the topic of conversation said like more and more institutions should be doing dual enrollment, more and more students should be doing dual enrollment. I feel like that's a prevailing thought. Tim is the one who's saying, well, wait now. Looking at where lottery expenditures are, that's where I'm concerned about. Yeah. Tim, do you have any other slides?
I've got one more quick slide. This is just a flow chart that shows the flow of the funds. Essentially, the net lottery proceeds come in along with the sports wagering tax. Those are revenues. And then the money goes in to pay for all of the programs that we have. You can see at the bottom there's a general shortfall reserve subaccount. That is about 110 million. We are able to tap into that if needed as well. But the unspent revenue at the top of that second piece there goes into the Tennessee Promise Scholarship Endowment. And I will say my news isn't all gloom and doom. So the good piece of this is that the Tennessee Promise Scholarship Endowment has increased. It's about 1.1 to 1.2 billion at this point. So Tennessee Promise has become self-sufficient. So I'm trying to end on a high note instead of giving you just bad news all the way around. But that's really been the positive that's come out of this as well. And happy to answer any questions. And thank you all for not throwing anything at me.
Tim, you may be the wrong person to ask this question, so I'll ask Director Gentile. This board is now the TSAC board, correct?
Correct.
So
July 1.
Yeah,
That's right.
so we're generally, what are going to be our responsibilities as it may relate to this and other issues?
Well, the reason why I asked if it was your last slide is because I wanted to I was hoping you bring this up, the general shortfall reserve subaccount. So let's talk about what happens. If lottery continues to be down, expenditures go up. We do have sports wagering coming over to cover any deficit, but let's say that's not enough. We have $110 million in a reserve account. $10 million of that can be used without us contributing back to it. That $100 million, though, that is, think of that as a one-time use. If we use any bit of that $100 million, we have to commit to fulfilling it back up, right?
Correct. We pay that amount back. with 5% of the quarterly transfers from the net lottery proceeds the following year until
After
it's back
that,
up.
after that, if we can't pay that deficit, then that's when you talk about having to shave off scholarships and what their magnitudes are.
Yeah, we also had statutory authority to reduce awards pro rata. And so that would be an unfortunate option, but it would be an option that we would have to discuss.
And so to Commissioner Smith's question, what role does TSAC board play in that situation?
That would probably be something, I think that would be something we would have to, and I can, Luke can weigh in, but we would have to speak with the legislature about if we got to that point where we had to reduce awards in that case.
But who takes action here? Does this commission take action, or with this merger or dissolution of the TSAC board?
Yeah.
But then you just referred to the TSAC board. Well, who is that? I thought that was us.
As of July 1, it will be.
Okay.
I think the question is though, what action would the TSAC board take, or what? Put it differently, what could the TSAC
I see
board do?
Yeah, I would think we would be making recommendations to the commission, to the legislature on actions that need to be taken. Is what I think our role would be in that.
Okay, but there are other duties and responsibilities that TSAC engaged in, and there were other members who are not represented in this commission. The independent colleges were on that board. Robert, you sat on that board. All of that is gone, right?
You want to speak to that? Or
Yeah, I mean, the commission is a TSAC board. I guess to get to to get to what I would think of your options in front of you are, one is take a look at those expenditures that are growing. Dual enrollment are growing. Chairwoman Scarlett asked a question over lunch to one of our presidents. Yeah, what value is dual enrollment? Where is dual enrollment working well? You know, kicking the tires and better understanding is where this money is going, is it into the right places? I think I think knowing where this money is going, as any time when budgets become tight, you start to ask what's worth the squeeze, what's not worth the squeeze. I see that being at the forefront. Second, if there were staff coming to the commission asking you to get behind a request to increase scholarships, you know, we had $110 million bucket of ideas this past year. Staff were good enough on the front end to say we don't have the money for it now. But I think TSAC Board of Directors needs to have an eye on, okay, what does the revenue look like? Is it worth expanding scholarships at this time? Another thing you can do is buy lottery tickets. That would be one aspect of it. But I think I think those first two are the purview of the TSAC board.
And you said that better than I did, but yes, when I say recommendations, that's exactly looking at each program and is it functioning the way it needs to, and do we need to dial back the GPA for a certain scholarship, or make it more difficult to achieve, to earn that scholarship or that grant or what have you. So, but different programs are going to require different changes.
We have that authority.
Well, we wouldn't necessarily have that authority. It would have to be a legislative change. But again, that would be recommendations that our staff would make and potentially pursue with the legislature if they needed to be changed.
And you have the authority as a TIA commission to also instruct the staff to engage in those recommendation processes too.
Okay. Well, I was doing a great job managing this up to the time that was allotted until you. No, thank you.
Glad I could be of service.
Well, actually, you do a fabulous job, Tim, and I want to compliment you and Peter and the other people for, I mean, the fate of an awful lot of families reside in the quality of work that you guys do to assure that this all works well. This this is an issue for us. And I feel like we're in good hands with your advice and counsel as we go forward with it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other business, pretty well worn you guys out. How you feeling? Okay, all right.
Yes, I'll mention this tomorrow, but Skylar's a brand new college graduate, so.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah,
a
so
wedding,
you'll
and-
not be paying tuition this coming year or not. Oh,
we got med school, that's right, and a wedding in 3 weeks for that matter, so.
What?
I said a wedding in 3 weeks, so.
Too many revelations right now. For later.
Got a weak heart, don't you? If there's no other business, otherwise we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank all of you as well.